And as we are starting our series, today we start with the first. And I believe Pastor Rick Warren did not arrange the sequence of the lessons by chance. He did it purposely for the simple reason that I know he knows which is the important part to start with. And that is spiritual transformation. And how else to be able to vividly exemplify spiritual transformation but through a parable. A parable is a brief instructive story in prose or verse which illustrates one or more lessons. It is a kind of analogy. And Jesus loved using parables, right? He loved telling stories. They were simple, but they were always purposeful. And some have called this parable as the greatest short story in the world. And I am sure all of us knows this story. And who does not know or even have heard the story of the prodigal son? The prodigal son, if I may say so, has been mistitled. Why? Because there are actually two sons in the story. The highlights of the story, which is a son who falls into sin, a son who comes back into sin, and a son who was deadma to what was happening. But in all of these three parts of the story, what was common was a father who was loving and ever-present in those different portions of the story. So William Barclay, a very a noted and a very good theologian, Bible scholar, has aptly, I think, entitled this parable to be the parable of the loving father instead of a prodigal son. Because pag sinabi mong prodigal son, it seems like siya yung focus ng story. But actually, the focus of the story should be that of a loving father. And if you are taking down notes, the title of this conversation is A Repentant Return. As the title goes, the character of the story, there is a character in the story who returns. And what kind of return is that? It is a repentant one. And if there's one key lesson that I would like you to take home today, it is this. The realization of our separation from God's love is the beginning of spiritual transformation. It is when we realize that we are separated from God's love, that is the beginning of spiritual transformation. Take note, I am not saying that it is spiritual transformation. I am saying that it is the beginning of spiritual transformation. So turn with me to Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15 says that Jesus has been, he was in his third year of ministry. And he has developed, he now has a group of fans. Diba? Famous na siya eh. And what more, alam natin that as you become famous, you don't only collect fans, but you also collect bashers. Diba? Kaya pag maraming nang babash sa inyo online, alam nyo, sikat na kayo. So Jesus had two sets of audience. Always, every time there was a gathering of him speaking, there would be two sets of people who would be there present. One group were his fans. And who were his fans? The tax collectors, the prostitutes, the sinners, the notorious of them all. That would be his fans. These are people who would be following him around. And there were his sets of bashers. And sino yung bashers niya? The Pharisees, and the Sadducees, and the scribes. These were people who thought that if Jesus is famous, if he is of God, then he should be, dapat tayo yung barkada niya. But what was happening here, ang barkada ni Jesus, one of the things that he was being bashed about was the fact that he was hanging out with the sinners and the wrong crowd. So sinasabi ng mga Pharisees, if he is of God, he should be joining us because we are supposedly the ones of God. Because we know then that the Pharisees were the very people who were the architects of Judaism, which was the religion of that day. They were not only architects, they were not only known of influencing religion, but they were also known influencing the political scenario of that time. So this is the population of the people who were watching Jesus, listening to him, following him. So bear that in mind. Two sets of crowd that Jesus had in his audience. And to be able to answer the Pharisees' question, why is he hanging out with sinners? Why is he dining even with these types of people when he should not? And he starts with this. First, he says, tax collectors and notorious sinners were often listening to Jesus. I've mentioned that a while ago. So, 3 portions. He starts with the first parable of the lost sheep. And what does he say? Diba? If there's one sheep that's lost among your 100 sheep, you leave the 99 and go and find that one lost sheep. What do you think was happening? Both his fans and his bashers were nodding in agreement and saying, yeah, you're right. We are going to go and find that sheep. Next part of the story, he tells about the lost coin. There was this woman who had lost one of her coins, very precious coins, silver coins at that. What did the woman do? The woman turns his house around to be able to find that one silver coin. And his audience were all in awe and saying, correct, tama. Everyone was in agreement. Jesus now had everybody's attention. And then, he moves on to the next portion of his story. The third parable that Jesus says and mentions and tells about is the gripping and moving story of the prodigal son, which is actually a story about a man and his 2 sons. Luke chapter 15 verse 11, where our story starts, it is very apparent that the author Luke wanted the emphasis on who? Sino yung una sa billing? The man. It is the father who should be the focus of this story. So he says there was a man who had 2 sons. And he goes on. The younger son told his father, I want my share of the estate before you die. So we understand that there are 2 kids, si Kuya at si Bunso. At si Bunso knows his rights. He knows that he has an inheritance. I guess in the Jewish home, they are told, mga anak, lahat ng natatanaw ninyo, atin yan. And part of that will go to you, Kuya, and part of that will go to the Bunso. And what portion goes to the elder son? The elder son always gets double a portion. The older son gets 2/3 and the younger son gets 1/3. And what did the story say? The story said, I want my inheritance now. In the Jewish society, it was all right for a father to allocate the inheritance. What does it mean? Everything that route is going to pass by, that's yours. The house, the lot, the grass, and every living animal that's there, that's yours. The father can do that, can allocate. That means it is already assigned. But he can only get it when the father dies. So what is the son saying here actually? The son is saying that, Dad, for me, you're good as dead. Because I want my inheritance right now. And as mentioned in previous preachings, inheritance during that time was not money. It was not money in the bank. It is not like there's a check that can be issued, because during that time, inheritance was in means of land, cattle, sheep, orchards, olive trees. There was not like cash. But here it was very apparent that the son wanted it in cash. Why? Because we will later on read that he wanted to leave. The son, when he was asking for the father's inheritance, did not only mean that he wanted his father dead, but he wanted his whole angkan dead. He was severing all ties. Because the time that you're only going to be able to get your inheritance is a point in time when your head of the family is dead. What do you think would be the natural reaction of a father? Lapastangan kang anak, sampal sa kanan. Salbahe, sampal sa kaliwa. That would have been acceptable, right? For a son to reject the love of a father or a mother for that matter, siguro naman, dapat lang parusahan siya. But what did the father do? He agrees to divide the wealth between the sons. Instead of getting upset, getting angry, he indulges. Pumayag yung tatay. And listen with me, in that crowd of people, what do you think the audience was doing? I'm sure all of them were sighing, murmuring. What? The father agreed. There was not a check that could be issued. His inheritance needed to be turned around into cash. It had to be liquidated. And for them to be able to liquidate at such a fast time, ibebenta mo ng palugi. And for you to sell your property, I am sure the whole village knew about it. And after that, that's the only time that you're going to sell it to someone who is outside of the family. But generally, it will just be handed down to another family member who has a lot of money readily available. So I am sure the whole village knew about it. He wanted his inheritance right now. And the father indulges. He simply divides his property. While the son was demanding, give me my inheritance now. Daddy, akin na yan. I want my inheritance right now. Where was Kuya? Kuya was silent. Nowhere in the story yet. I am sure he knew. If the whole village knew, what more your household? What happens next? A few days later, it's not even a month, it's not even a year, 6 months. So sigurado palugi talaga binenta ni tatay yung properties. He said this younger brother, this younger son, packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land. He left his father, his brother, and his whole family. And do you know that getting your inheritance before your father dies just meant that you are cutting all ties from your family? And that is what he did. He left his family and forgot them and cut all his ties with them. So he left for a distant land, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. The younger son did not waste any time. We can just presume he might have gone to the city, bought a beautiful condo, penthouse, bought a Ferrari, and worse, if you read it further down, you will know that part of that wild living was that he was living with prostitutes and different women. And I'm sure he was gambling and drinking and just living the wild life. He was far away from his father, and he could do anything he wanted. And that's what he just did. And the story continues. About the time that his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. As expected. Hindi naman siya nagtatrabaho, bili lang siya ng bili, gastos lang siya ng gastos. He would be dining out in good, famous restaurants. He would be gambling. He would be living the wild life. Of course, his money was going to run out. He was not working. He was not investing. He was not doing anything with it. Economic crisis is so real to us. A lot of us moved to Singapore simply because there was an economic crisis in our country. Or some of us were saying that here is better because it's stable. And that's what happened to him. His leaving was his fault. But the economic crisis was not his fault. And I am sure that even if he wanted to work, there was no work available. unemployment rate is very high in certain countries. And that is what he experienced. He had no more money, there was no work to be taken, and there was no investment to go to. And what happens next? He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him to the fields to feed the pigs. Why is that huge? Because pigs were considered the dirtiest of the dirtiest animals then. And for a Jew to go down to that level, that is big. You do not even go touch or even get near the pigs. Can you imagine a rich young man now going down to the level of an unheard of situation wherein he starts feeding the pigs? You think you would imagine that at this point in time, ano kaya naiisip nitong batang to? Nothing. Okay, there's still work. I can still go. I can still feed the pigs. Then I will be given something in return because I am hired. I can still do something. I can still solve my problem. Pretty much like us. When we can still solve our problem, what happens? We still solve it. We do it on our own. But this is what happens. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him. Ganun na po siya kagutom. He was already getting delirious. He could see that the pig's feed was already good and delicious to eat. When I was young, there was this old man in our community who would go and collect kaning baboy. Diba? I don't know. Well, our kids don't know this anymore, okay? Before, they would have pigs that they would take care of. So what they would do is go from house to house collecting all of their leftover food. So there would be soup there would be rice, there would be noodles. Sorry ha. And they would put it in one whole pail. And can you imagine how that looked like? It was not a good sight to look at. But can you imagine? This young man found that food good and delicious to eat. But you know what happened? This is the stringer. But no one gave him anything. Not even the pig's feed was good for him to eat, to be given to eat. Because siguro famine, starvation. So every feed that goes to the pig is important. So not even that, they can spare for him to eat. What do you think happened? This is the highlight of the story. When he finally came to his senses. Siguro as he was looking at the food, the pigs were all eating and eating and eating. And he was there dirty, slimy, smelly, I'm sure. He hasn't taken a bath. He would be shoving and pushing the pigs just to be able to get a crumb there. Siguro nadunggol siya nung isang baboy. Napaupo siya. I'm sure that was how quiet his audience was. Because at that time, when he finally realizes, and when he finally comes to his senses, that is when spiritual transformation begins. Because when we realize our separation from God's love, it is only there and only then that we can begin our spiritual transformation. It is only then when we are down and out, when everything else has failed, when we realize, wow, I'm so far from God. That is when spiritual transformation begins. Because what does he do? He said to himself, at home, even a hired servants have food enough to spare. In the hierarchy of labor, in his household, had food, not enough food to eat. He had enough food to spare. And that was the realization of the son. When he was there feeding off of what was even left of the pig's feed, he then realizes, sa bahay ng tatay ko, kahit yung mga hired servants, umaapaw yung pagkain. And here I am, dying of hunger. The moment we realize, Lord, I'm so far away from you, that is when we can begin spiritual transformation. That is when we can be transformed. That is the only time, mga kapatid. So in his realization, what does he do? I will go home to my father. Take note, I will. He then determines, okay, I am down and out now. I will go home to my father. He decides at that point in time, I will change. I will go home to my father. And what did he say? I will go home to my father and say, he prepares a speech. He prepares a monologue. And this is what he says. Father, this is what I'm going to say. Father, I have sinned. I have sinned against both heaven and you. And I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me in as a hired servant. So what does he do? He goes back. He walks. Diba noong unang panahon, lumalakad lang naman eh. So he walks. And as he was walking, I am sure he was memorizing and changing his speech. And he was saying, Father, I am a bad person. Mali. Father, I have sinned. So when he realizes that he has sinned, and he realizes that I can no longer go back to you as your son, but I am willing to be your hired servant. That is the train of thought that was happening as he was going home. You know that he was endangered of being killed when he goes home because he has cut off all ties. He has maligned his family. He has not been a good son, and that's tantamount to him being killed. He could have been killed. And what happens? So, he returned home to the father. And while he was still a long way off, when I was reading this, sabi ko, Lord, it was such good news to hear the reaction of the father. Because what was the reaction of the father? As the father saw him a long way off, his father saw him coming, filled with love and compassion. The father had all the right. Stand in the corner ka. No computer for a month. Diba? He could have been punished. But the father welcomed him filled with love and compassion. He ran to the son. And that is something that was uncalled for people of a ranking. Because a father is supposed to be a position that is honored. And he is not supposed to be doing that. And I saw this picture. I don't know how clear it is, but it is of a father. He did not mind being ridiculed or being corrected. He just ran off and welcomed his son with embraces and kisses. The description was that he was being kissed talagang all over and hugged very tight. And as that was happening, the son goes on with his speech. His son says, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and earth. He was expressing his realization. But what did the father do? Siguro midway in his speech, the father would be kissing him. Imagine with me. He was being hugged. Diba? He was being hugged very, very tight. Siguro hindi siya makapagsalita. Father, I'm sorry, Father. He was not even completed his speech. He was just midway there. And what did the father do? His father called the servants. Quick! Bring the finest robe. He was not going to be taken in as a hired servant. He was still going to be given that position of honor. Because having a robe is a position of honor. So he was being given, he was being reconciled back and placed in that same status. Bring him the finest robe. Put the ring on him. And put the sandals at his feet. The ring is a sign of a family. It's like an emblem. So when you have that ring, they know that you belong to that family. And it was the father's sign that you are back. Kill the calf that we have been fattening, and we must celebrate with a feast. So meron silang pinapatabang baka. Para saan? For a feast. The father was anticipating that there was going to be a big feast. The father expected. When everyone else already knew he's not gonna come back. He's good as dead. Never forget him already. The father knew. And the father expected that he was coming back. For this son of mine was lost, but now is found. And what happens? This son was welcomed back into the family with merrymakings and feasting. Alam niyo po mga kapatid, a parable is always likened. In the characters of the parable, there is always someone who stands to be like God. And here, the Father is being mimicked, is being personified. As what God does, He will welcome us into His fold. But there's a prerequisite. The beginning of that spiritual transformation is when we realize that we are so far away from Him. God's love, that never changes. It's always there. It's stationary. Pag sinabi natin, I don't feel God. God is so far away from me. No. It is you who are moving away from God because God is stationary, always just there. But remember, there's a third character to the story. There is the older son who was in the fields working. And as he was working, he comes home and malayo pa lang siya. I'm sure he could hear the music. There were disco lights in the house. Araw na araw, why is there so much noise? So he comes home and talks to a servant. And what? And asks him, what's going on? And what did the servant say? Your brother is back. Huh? What brother? I don't have a brother. Because he's considered dead, right? No. You remember that brother of yours who left and got his inheritance? Well, he's back. And your father has killed the fattened calf to be able to have a feast because we are celebrating his safe return. Do you think he had the same reaction as the father? He would run, embrace, and kiss him? No. The older brother was angry and ayaw niyang pumasok. He didn't want to go home. What did the father do again? The father came out and begged him. He replied, all these years, I've slaved off. Take note of that word. What did he say? I've slaved off for you. He wasn't considering himself as a son. He was considering himself as one of the slaves. That was how he felt towards his father. And what further does he say? Never once have you refused me to do a single thing for you. And during that time, as my friends were partying, you did not even give me a goat to feast with my friends. Yet, this son, he did not consider him a brother because he said, yes, yet this son of yours comes back, squandering all your wealth with ill living, and doon natin makikita. Right? What I mentioned a while ago. He squandered his money on prostitutes, and here you are celebrating by killing the fattened calf. Sabi siguro ni Kuya, sa kasal ko yan dapat eh. And now just because he comes back, you kill the cow? Because we know that when you kill a cow, that's a huge party. So there was really a big feast that was happening. And this brother was feeling so bad that he didn't even want to go in to welcome his brother. And he started expressing his disappointment against the father. And then the father says, look, dear son, sweetly, gently, he explains himself, look, dear son, you have always stayed by my side, and everything I have is yours. But did the brother really stay with him? The elder brother may have been home, but it doesn't seem like he was in spirit that he was in the home. Because what he said, we have to celebrate this happy day for your brother because he has come back to life. He was lost, but now is found. What happens next? Wala na. Tapos na yung parable. End of story. Really. The parable ends there. We don't know what happens to the younger son and the older son. We don't know if the younger son indeed repented and changed his ways because he was not given a probationary period. Right there and then, when he came home and he was accepted by the father, benefits and all. Yes, I don't think an inheritance was given back to him. Because wala na, he took it away already. But he still started living as part of the family. And what happened to Kuya? What do you think happened to Kuya? We can very well surmise that the younger son, upon realizing how far he has distanced himself from the father, how far he has gone away from his love, how far he has left his relationship with his father, we know, we can trust that spiritual transformation started there. As compared to the elder brother. Yes, he was home. Yes, he was always with the father. But was he really with the father? Did he really understand his position, the love of his father, the benefits, the blessings that he was receiving as far as his relationship with the father was concerned? We can conclude that he did not experience spiritual transformation. But one thing we can conclude here, that when he realizes how far he is, that he does not recognize his father's love, we know that spiritual transformation will happen. When we are down and out, when we can no longer solve our problems, then and only then do we reach out and say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and you. People often feel that we must clean up our acts first before they can come to church. Jesus changed that. Come, and we will clean up your act. Come home, reestablish your relationship with the Father, and watch spiritual transformation to happen. The younger son's sin was obvious. He displayed it to the world. He took all of his inheritance, squandered it, lived the high life, lived off of prostitutes and harlots. He displayed his distance away from the Father. He was separated from the Father's love. How many of us are like that now? The elder brother chose to stay. He was just nearby, or was he? Outwardly, he was with the Father, but inwardly, he too was far away from home. Are we like the elder brother? He was home, yet not at home. I don't know what your spiritual condition is right now. I don't know if you are the younger brother or the elder brother, or are we neither? But remember, our realization of our separation from God's love is when we begin spiritual transformation. When we realize that, Lord, apart from you, I cannot do anything. Lord, apart from your love, I am nothing. That is the point in time when spiritual transformation can happen. So what do we do for us to be in that point? In verse 17, when he finally realizes that he was so far away from the Father, what did he do? He determined himself. He decided that he was going to go home. That is what we're going to do today. We want spiritual transformation to happen, and we will return to God. I don't know how far off you've come. Are we like the younger brother who indeed has gone so far off, has gone astray? Or are we like the older brother? Yes, we're sitting in church. We're here every Sunday. We're here every Friday. But where is that heart of ours? Are we straying far away from God?